All right. So, Tonya, I am excited about this conversation. This is going to be so much fun. Thank you so much for being willing to have this very interesting and maybe a little controversial conversation with me.
I'm thrilled to, and you know that we both live in life in these lanes, and so I'm happy to talk about it with you, and always to be on camera with you. So let's do it.
This is going to be fun. So it's 3 o'clock. We have about 30 minutes. I'm going to jump right in. For those of you who may have questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat or in the comments, and we'll do our best to answer your questions as they come up. So I am thrilled to have Professor Tonya Evans with me. I hesitated to say professor because it used to be Dean Tonya Evans and is now Professor Tonya Evans. And Tonya, I would love for you to start out just talking a bit about your background and your academic journey. Introduce yourself to folks. I'll do the same so we can lay the foundation for where we're coming from, and then we'll jump right in.
Excellent. Well, I'm currently a full visiting professor at the Penn State Dickinson School of Law, and previously I was an associate dean for academic affairs at UNH Law. I developed and directed the blockchain, cryptocurrency, and law online program. We'll talk more about that because that helped me create some of the lanes that we'll be talking about today. I took a non-traditional path to life as a lawyer. I was known in the 90s as lawyer by day, poet by night. And before that, yes, all the snaps and the claps. And even before that, even more non-traditional. I am a former professional tennis player. I went to Northwestern undergrad, played for them on scholarship, turned pro, left the court of tennis to join the court of law. And I went to Howard University School of Law, HU, and you can't stop the hustle. um, and although I've spent a lifetime as a lawyer, my professional lifetime as a lawyer and an academic, I'm a writer, speaker, and teacher at my heart. And underneath it all is being an entrepreneur. So I'm the CEO of me, and I look forward to talking about that with you today.
Yes. So, gosh, so many things. You've always had a lot on your plate, right? So it's not new to you to juggle multiple things and figure out how to balance all these things. And I just have to say this before I even introduce myself. I heard you first say that you were the CEO of me probably 6 or 7 years ago. We were both at a conference. We were both speaking at this particular event, and you were on a panel about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And another woman on the panel who was also an academic said, we've been talking about blockchain and crypto and Bitcoin for years, and we missed the boat on that. But here are the opportunities you have now. And you corrected her. You said, not all of us missed the opportunity.
Stay ready so you don't have to get ready. It's
That's
true.
exactly right. And I have to tell you, when you said that, I went back and looked at my teaching notes to see, was I talking about Bitcoin, for however many years ago, and it was maybe 20 cents or whatever. And I was. I was of that mindset that academics did one thing. And you were the first person really to open my eyes to this concept of really being the CEO of me, and not just one thing, and actually not even defining myself by one thing. So I have to thank you for that.
Oh,
Because
thank you.
my bulb really went off when I heard you say that.
Nice.
So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Shontavia Johnson. Kind of like Tonya, I've always worn multiple hats. I am an intellectual property lawyer by training, and I have been multi-passionate my entire life. Right now, I serve in an academic administrator role at Clemson University. I'm the Associate Vice President for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. I spent about a decade as a law professor, fully tenured, was the youngest fully tenured professor, I think, at my university, first Black tenured woman professor in the history of the law school, and just juggled a lot of things along with that role of being the only. And that's one of the reasons I got interested in this. So hearing Tonya talk about it, seeing other people really in my, not even necessarily my friend group or my professional group, but people who I aspired to be like, seeing the things they were doing. I didn't have a title for it or a term for it, but I knew I wanted something like that where I had my research, I had the stuff I was doing in the classroom, but there were these other things I wanted to do too. So Tonya, I want to start with you and this whole concept of being the CEO of me, because I've heard you say that many times over the past, I don't know, few years, 6 or 7 years or so. How did you get to that point? Because you were an academic and still thinking of yourself as the CEO of me. Why is that?
It's a two-part answer. One is who I come from. I come from generations of entrepreneurs, and my mom is actually doing a lot of our genealogy. She's the historian for my family, and so I'm hearing so much that makes sense to me now, having the first store, or someone who formed the first church, or different ways that my mom, one of the first Black patent attorneys, when she came up, but she was always doing something outside of that. She ended up having a very successful practice outside of the traditional confines of the law. My father, he's a surgeon. He started in first the military, actually, and then in formal medicine, but ultimately decided that he was going to hang out his own shingle. And it was really important from my family's perspective to make sure that you control your destiny. Some of it, when I think back to further generations behind that, we didn't have traditional opportunities. You had to make a way. And if you didn't make a way for yourself, then you succumb to the winds of whether or not someone was going to accept you, or taking pennies and change rather than truly having agency and autonomy and creating generational wealth, so we're not starting over generation after generation. So all of that is inside of me. And when I think about, in some sense, my life was a lot about checking the boxes. So the coloring inside the lines part of me wanted to make sure that I had the academic and professional pedigree that gave myself options. But it was to give myself options, not because that was the path I always wanted to be on. I started in big firms. I knew instantly I didn't want to be there, but I knew I had earned the right to be there. But just because you have the right to be at a place does not mean that place is for you. And so about 3 years into that, I realized, no, I'm going to do this on my own or by my own terms. That still was a long trek to where I am now, starting the Advantage Evans Academy, really taking the best of all that I had created to add value to institutions, to decide in this particular act of my life, stop giving so much out without having the requisite benefits for myself. If somebody's willing to pay you 6 figures to do something, how much are the other people making? How much is the institution making? How much are we sewing into the experiences as intrapreneurs, being entrepreneurial within a system, within academia in particular? When you think about the tenure track, for example, where you really do have to have your head down, but we create so much value that you and I have always talked about ways that we can monetize and create other platforms that we can work outside of the formal structures and the traditional structures to make sure that we have options.
Yeah, so what does that look like for you? I know your story, but people watching may not know your story. What is your academic story?
My academic story, I practiced law for 10 years. I actually started out in the trust and estates department for high net worth individuals, doing sophisticated high net worth planning at 2 large firms in Philadelphia. So I would do that during the day, but at night I was hanging out in coffee shops and performing and meeting cool, creative people. I'm a creator at heart, as I told you earlier. Lawyer by day, poet by night was my moniker. I'd work till about 10 at night and then hit a coffee shop and perform for the rest of the night. And even during that time, Def Poetry Jam was out. So I remember one pivotal moment that was great for me, but not so great to my assigning partner at this law firm, where I was the opener to the opener to the opener of Music Soul Child, because I was doing Def Poetry Jam. And Def Jam Records was having all of these poets combined with their neo soul artists at the time. And I was on the front page of there in Philadelphia, they have this weekend mag, right, where you know all the goings on. I was smack dab in my find your own shine, lawyer by day, poet by night thing. Nobody in the firm thought that was great, because if I had time to do that, then that meant I wasn't doing my work. And that was one of the early signals to me that in order to really fit in, I couldn't be myself. And if I couldn't be myself, I couldn't create the outside accomplishments and the outside platforms that I wanted to have. So I did that. I kept my head down, did that for 3 years. I joined my mom in practice. She was already out by then. So that was the beginning, not only of that practice, but also to form my first company, which was FIOS Entertainment. And FIOS is an acronym that stands for Find Your Own Shine. It's my signature poem, and that led to some of the other entrepreneurial things I did, really in intellectual property. And that's how it was a long kind of and winding road, 10 years in, where there was a dean at Widener who offered me an opportunity to teach real property, not intellectual property, not entertainment, not literary law, real property, first year grind. I was going through personal transition at the time, and I was looking for some W-2 income. And so academia, while it was not on the radar for me, I clerked in Third Circuit and did all of those other things where it would be appropriate, but academia was not on my radar until I needed to pivot to have some flexibility, believing that academia was one of those few places where you have a great deal of autonomy while still being, having healthcare and a decent pay. And I found my way after that, not intending even to be a tenured professor, but I received tenure as an associate professor at Widener. Then I lateraled to UNH Law and went in as a full professor with tenure, and then became an administrator. So it wasn't something that I planned, but in some ways it was something that I planned for because I was ready when the opportunity presented itself.
Right. Yeah, and I think, people come into academia so many different ways. And obviously, the law professor journey is a lot different from scientists who maybe go to graduate school, get a PhD, and go directly into an academic role. But I think the common thread is that you get into this environment, you are teaching, you are researching, you are providing service to the university, and it's a grind until you get tenure. And for some people, it's a grind even after that, depending on the type of research they do and what they want to do with their professional career, particularly in academia. So it's tough when you are in those early stages to think about anything else other than research, writing, or whatever you're doing for your own research and writing, teaching, and service. So at what point did you decide you were going to take a bigger step into the public? Because I know you said you came into this in a little bit of a different form, but you were very successful. You got tenure. When did you decide to grow your brand publicly outside of the academic sphere? Or did you continue that throughout the whole time?
I pulled back in those early years as I was trying to figure out academia. And
Mhm.
that's something that when you have a lot of different interests and talents, whether they be, hobbies or some professional pursuit, I did have to make a conscious decision in those early years to figure out academia. Some of the best advice I received when I went to Widener said, "Kid, you're amazing. All the things that you do out there in the world, amazing." He says, "No one gives a blank here." He said, "But if you come in and you respect this process," and he was doing it in a way to really support me, not to discourage me, to
Mhm.
say that academia, particularly for those who don't appreciate or respect practical training before, and to your point of not going immediately into an academic track, being the only person of color on that faculty, that's not true. I was one of a few Black people when I came in, but slowly over the years, mysteriously, we seem to disappear, we leave
Mhm.
when we don't feel accepted, appreciated, supported in academia. So I was the sole survivor, literally, and wanted to figure out how to do that well. So that means buckling down with my writing. And so I found that writing was getting in the way of my creativity in the early years, but I really needed to solidify myself as a writer, a scholarly writer, which was very different, obviously, than being a poet. But what I did do throughout was to continue to speak. So going out, and you and I have done a million academic conferences. I focused on academic conferences earlier. As I started to build my esteem on the academic side, probably midway through is when I started to turn my attention back to sewing back into my entrepreneurial endeavors. Bios Entertainment LLC still existed. I still had a series of legal reference guides for writers that I sold. I still did those speaking engagements that bridge the divide between intellectual property and innovation. That's when I started to talk about innovation, what the next wave of innovation was going to mean for intellectual property generally.
Mhm.
So I was finding those opportunities to build out my website, to tweet, to share, to blog about that in a more, a less academic way, so that I was more relevant for the regular person who's not the egghead in academia. I'm calling myself an egghead, not of my esteemed colleagues, but it's the weird world. We talk in a way that people don't really get, right? So trying to take the academic part of it, distill it, chop it up, and to present it in different ways to remain relevant in regular spheres.
Yeah, so that was smart because I didn't do that at all. And it cost me some. So I started out in a tenured position. So before I went into my tenured role, I did a 2-year fellowship in New Orleans at Loyola University College of Law. Then I moved to a tenure track position at Drake University Law School in Des Moines, Iowa. And it was a pretty traditional faculty, but they were very, very supportive of me and very supportive of my weird, crazy ideas about building a public brand. And I think that came from seeing people growing up reading like Cornel West's books and seeing people like Michael Eric Dyson, and then later Melissa Harris Perry, and then Mark Lamont Hill, like seeing these academics with a public facing brand, like that always appealed to me. And I was really impatient. And so I started writing publicly while I was always writing scholarship. And that proved to be a significant hurdle for me to overcome during the tenure and promotion year. So I tend to agree with you that in those early years when you're thinking about tenure and promotion, keep your head down, make sure your writing is good, your research is good, your science is good if you're a scientist, before focusing on those other things. But along those same lines, it was somewhat of a double-edged sword because it was tough and it was a ton of work. But what I started noticing when I was writing publicly, I started out writing op-eds in the newspaper and then for theconversation.com. And with The Conversation, I was getting in these huge media publications. And potential students started coming to Drake because they would read my writing or see me speaking or whatever. And so the university and the law school liked that component of it.
Yes.
No, it didn't, like my work was never as academically serious as maybe some other topics. I was writing about memes and intellectual property and lots of things that people thought was just weird. Right. And it was just what I wanted to do. And I stayed on that path. And to your point, it's tough in those early years, but I found it valuable. The university ultimately supported me in my TPR, in my tenure and promotion process. But I've heard so many people say all politics is local with universities. And like to your point, your colleague, when you got to Widener saying you're great, but nobody cares.
Not here. Ixnay on the Ockingtay about all that other stuff. Focus.
That's right. So you get tenure, you expand. Now you've created this robust business. Could you talk a bit about the ways that you've been entrepreneurial and also, if you can, the way you've built a public-facing brand?
So to the latter point is always making sure that I had a platform outside of the university context. So many academics rely on their faculty bio as being their primary mode of communication or public-facing communication about who you are and what you do. Oftentimes, we don't have the flexibility to update that, and it's only as good as, I left the position on June 30th. July 1, I started somewhere completely different. And so the new copy is up and somewhere different. You always want to have your outside assets, your website. If you're going to have blog content, that's fine. Or the relatively recent podcast, although I did have a podcast a lot earlier in my career before I started teaching, at the Lit podcast for Writers on the Go. Look at that. Look how that came full circle. We'll talk about that. So you always want to have be able to drive traffic to your personality, your digital footprint that you can control so that you can pull in all of those other pieces regardless of where you are on loan as the CEO of you. So that's one thing. Once I received tenure, I missed very much the creative side. I missed very much connecting with people outside of academia. And I used that as the opportunity with the shelter of some shelter of tenure. I'm still a Black woman in academia. And so that is what it is. You get tenure on one day and you're literally the same person. And now maybe more people are mad at you because you actually have achieved something more. And people smile, but that smile could actually cut you. So you still always have to be on guard. It's still a mask, but I was more willing to not wear a mask that would prevent me from making sure that my talents and my expertise were also being developed and adding value outside of that university.
Mm-hmm.
Law schools are going to come and go, jobs come and go, particularly in this day and age where people don't stay 30 years. People barely stay 30 minutes in a job. It looks very different than when I was first being raised to go ahead and get that good job. Don't leave it. I saw you talking about that on social media recently. Don't leave that good job. And it depends on how you define good. So, but I was more willing, to your point, to reach outside of those confines and say, okay, I did that for 7 years. Whew, that was a lot. It took a lot out of me. In what ways can I start to edify myself and to also insulate myself from the ebbs and flows, because tenure is tenure until it isn't. You have tenure until there's a financial exigency and all of a sudden you're being offered a package. So nothing is forever. And I'm always thinking forward for that next move. And so I started writing more about the things I was more interested in. I didn't call it this at the time, but reskill myself as a lifelong learner to say, what's the next thing that my students should know about? And that forced me to keep an open mind about the next wave of whatever. And for me, that happened to be Web 3.0 technologies, that happened to be blockchain and cryptocurrency. I was really in my first year at UNH when I started talking about it, and nobody really knew anything about it. So instantly, without being an expert, I expertised myself because I always knew more than anybody else in the room. And people were willing to fly me around to hear me talk about the intersection of blockchain and intellectual property. So I was still pulling it in to the core of my expertise, but talking about the next step. And that is what brought me outside of academia, because many academics weren't talking about it. They, in fact, pushed back against it. You think you were talking about weird stuff. Try convincing people that CryptoKitties, cryptography, and copyright is something that any lofty law professor would give a damn about. They might as well have thrown tomatoes at me, but it was fine because at that point, I was like, I don't care. This is what I'm doing. And I'll do it here and I'll do it outside of here. And there's a certain sense of substantial empowerment when you know you created something that you could go anywhere in the world and do. And that wherever you are, they have the privilege. It's not to be better than someone, but they're privileged to have your expertise and experience. And we have to start looking at the value of what we add as being something that we are gifting, loaning to others until we're not there anymore. So that's really my point of view and how I started to do that pivot that led to what I'm doing now.
I love that. So you started out thinking what was good for your students. And so many faculty members, like, we care about our students. We want to be good teachers. We want to create the next wave of entrepreneurs, business leaders, political leaders, all those kinds of folks. And so I love that you started there with what is good for the student. And then you expertised yourself in that thing. And then you created scholarship, you created research around that topic. I think a lot of faculty members don't know where to get started, right? Because we have these very nuanced, expertise niches, and we don't know how to put a dollar amount on that to even think about a business or whatever. But I love the way you just broke it down. Like, no, you can create a thing that other people will pay for, right? And you've done that not just through speaking and consulting, though that is part of it too. What else are you doing in your business right now?
So in law school, I had already made the pivot to teach many of my classes online. This was pre-COVID-19. So I was well situated to not have to pivot like so many academics who were left in the lurch trying to figure out, how do I move something that I have done for 10 years in a
Mm-hmm.
traditional in-classroom experience online? What are the platforms? What are the methods and the mediums? Because you want to have there's no sense of equality, but it has to have some type of equitable presentation, meaning that however you deliver content in person should generally speaking be the same online, unless there's a pedagogical reason not to. And there are many. There are many reasons where you may have to flip the classroom. You can't do the stodgy old lecture. Nobody wants to stare at a light bulb all day, basically, to be, spoon-fed information. It's far more dynamic. So I was really excited always about technology and the opportunity to be one of the vanguards in the space of legal education, to start delivering content online and to work with instructional designers in a more robust format. So I was ready, I can't believe it's the same year, but earlier this spring when we had to do that pivot. Around that time, I also started thinking there were good aspects about the program, but there were a lot of limitations in the way we were marketing the program, limitations in the type of consumer or student who would be interested. Think it was really difficult for an external partner to figure out how to market something that didn't exist, and to figure out how to do it and where. I couldn't always fully articulate it, but I knew that people trusted me. They saw me. I don't appear to be crazy. And I was talking about some cool things that people wanted to learn in a safe environment. From that, I said, well, I'm going to start delivering my own online courses. Obviously, I still do my traditional teaching, which this year will be online. But in addition to that, everybody's not a lawyer. Everybody's not a business person. And I'm really focused on mass adoption, particularly for women and communities of color, Black women. I have my first cohort of 11, all women, mostly women of color. And it's really heartening to know that I am empowering people in the same way that I wanted the best for my law students, is the same thing that I want for traditionally underestimated communities in this next wave of technology. So I created From Cash to Crypto. I created my own online academy. I'll be teaching both from cash to crypto and also things related to the future of entrepreneurship and the future of work.
And anybody can register for those courses. You don't have to have a degree. You don't have to have a whatever.
That's correct. That's correct. And we have talked quite a bit about how education is changing. This is controversial coming from Shontavia and I, but education costs too much. It takes too long. There's so many traditional businesses, companies, corporations, technology sectors that are making undergrad degrees optional. Nice if you have it, but they're focused on skills and credentials. I know that you focus on that so more when you're figuring out how can people prepare themselves for the future of entrepreneurship, because you've done your own pivot here.
No, that is such a great point, right? So if for those of you listening and watching, if you're an entrepreneur at heart and a faculty member, one of the first places to start, to Tonya's point, this is what I've done too. Tonya and I work together a lot. We have a business together. We've created programming together. We've done a lot of things together. And we both feel similarly about this. The easiest place to start as an academic who wants to create some entrepreneurial endeavor is with all the knowledge you already have and figuring out how to translate that to a broader audience. Right. And one of the first things I did, and this is what I was saying earlier, when I was writing publicly and also doing my research for tenure and promotion, writing publicly is one of the best things I did. Even though I wasn't selling anything then, I didn't know how to sell anything. I didn't know how to start a business. But when I was writing for the conversation, and my writing ended up in Time and ended up in the Washington Post, I've been published and recorded and journaled by the Smithsonian. And one of the things they taught me was to write to the level of a smart 10th grader. And not because the public can't understand anything smarter, but it's just easier to understand, learn, and digest if you're creating things that people can catch pretty quickly. And so when I started my business, and Tonya and I both have intellectual property backgrounds, I come from entrepreneurs. I wanted to teach other people how to start their businesses. I took all this knowledge I had from law school, from similar to Tonya, working with very sophisticated Fortune 50, Fortune 100 companies, and broke it down for a public audience. And there are people who want to learn those things. Education is key right now. Like you hear about content creators all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And that really just means people who are either entertaining you or educating you. The folks who are really doing well in the economy we have right now, which is so weird with everything going on, are people who are either entertaining you or educating you. I've heard Gary Vaynerchuk say that many, many times, and I've found it to be true. And to the extent you can break down those things you already know and understand and teach to a broader audience, there will be a market for those things, right? And Tonya, you and I have talked about this a lot. I'd love to know in the last couple of minutes what you think about this. Faculty members at many universities, like we get tenure, we're set for life. We have a pretty great gig for many folks for many different reasons. But there's always a ceiling. There's a financial ceiling. There's a research ceiling for some folks. There's just more you want to do, right? And particularly with that financial piece, I mean, law professors get paid pretty well, generally speaking, but you're not really going to create economic independence just teaching at a university. So being entrepreneurial are ways that you could do that, even if you're just doing research, creating innovation, and selling it or licensing it to folks. And so, Tonya, I wonder if you have in this last kind of minute or so advice for folks who want to figure out their entrepreneurial path while also remaining in higher ed.
For what you are doing right now, the thing that gives you the greatest joy is going to be your easiest path to some type of monetization of that. And I would not let the goal of monetization get in the way of just starting. Start tweeting about it, start sharing information, start building community, and you'll actually find your way to the things that people want through that type of social engagement. So leveraging Twitter, leveraging Instagram or Facebook, whatever your preference is for platform, start building a community around a topic that you love, adding value to other people, and they will start to inform your decisions about what things they might buy, what things they might support, what services they might want from you. So I would start there.
Yeah, and you've done that, right? Like you went from 0 to 1,000 with Twitter, right? Like
right.
You
I went hard in the Twitter paint.
You did. You decided I'm going to be a blockchain crypto expert. And you went out and created it. And to your point, you built this community on Twitter with thousands of followers now who are ready to engage with you in other ways, including buying your products and services. So I love that advice. The other thing I would add, particularly for those people who are scientists or working at a university with a very robust research division, is making sure you know and understand both your tenure and promotion guidelines and also your conflicts of interest policies. Because a lot of universities will say up front, here are the things you can do outside of the university, here are the things you cannot do. Here are the things that if you do them, we own your intellectual property. So Tonya and I both have intellectual property backgrounds. We know a lot of the real value is in ownership, right? And so you don't want to run afoul of any of your tenure and promotion guidelines, the conflicts policies. But if you have, or where you have latitude, that is a great sweet spot for academics who want to pursue entrepreneurship. So there's a question in the chat. So Jan asks if we have suggestions about getting it all done, because it can be very time consuming to engage with social media. Tonya, you are a social media maven. I don't know if you want to start with that question.
Tweet without ceasing. I think you need a schedule that you can manage. And if it's something that's a chore. So for me, it's a joy, but I actually had to switch my focus from 90% random stuff and 10% business to 90% business and 10% random stuff. Because in my mind, if it's not making money or joy, it don't make sense. Thank you, hashtag Robbie. And we say that all the time. But for a lot of people, they see it as a chore. I want you to think about it differently, maybe challenge the mindset to see it as an opportunity for connection, and find a platform that resonates with you, and maybe set up a schedule. Shontavia, I can't recall if you use an actual platform to schedule them in advance and push them out, but
Yep.
there might be 1 hour a week that you say, I'm going to post these 4 things. And you do it in the hour that you have, you schedule them, set it and forget it. And in that way, because people have a very short attention span, and if you go away for too long or if you're too silent, you won't have the engagement and the support that you need when you want to launch something more robust. So plan for it, and then maybe it won't be more of a chore, as much of a chore.
Yeah, I love that advice. The other thing I would say is pick one platform. Like, don't try to be everything to everybody. So Tonya is awesome on Twitter. I mostly rant on Twitter, where I am better, particularly around my brand and my business, is Instagram.
Yes.
And some of that is because what I've decided is I will give so this lesson I actually teach in the Brand and Business Academy, which is the program that I founded to teach working professionals how to start their businesses. One of the things I suggest is giving $1 a day. And by $1 a day, and I actually adapted this from an entrepreneur named Gary Vaynerchuk, but essentially give your 2 cents on social for about 50 minutes a day. And he suggests actually $1.80. I ain't got that kind of time. But for 50 minutes, I can give my 2 cents. And sometimes that is me engaging with other people on the things that they are posting on Instagram, sometimes on LinkedIn, mostly Instagram. Sometimes that's me creating my own content. I do use a scheduler. I use Creator Studio, which is a platform that Facebook offers. And I schedule some things, but a lot of times I do it live because, number one, I think algorithms favor that, but also I like the engagement. I like the interaction. I like quoting or citing something or commenting on something and having someone respond and us engaging in a conversation. I've actually gotten new clients that way.
Me too.
So I give myself $1 a day. I give my 2 cents for about 50 minutes most days. And I know that's tough, but if you think about it the same way in your academic life, why do we go to conferences? Why do you go give poster presentations? Why do you go speak at a thing where you know you don't have the time or energy? It's because you want to get your research out there. You want to get a great publication. You want the things that come along with your academic success. And to Tonya's point, I would say translate that same thing into what you want to do with your entrepreneurial endeavor. But I do think picking one thing is really important because there's so much you could do. There's so many conversations you could be having, and you're just one person with a full-time job, maybe with a spouse or parents that you're taking care of, or children or whatever. So you can't be everything to everybody, and I don't think anyone should try. And then also being transparent too with if you're in a department with your department chair, if you're in a law school with your dean, if you are an administrator with your president or provost or executive leadership, so that it's not a surprise to anybody, right? Because none of the things, if you're an entrepreneur, are bad necessarily, but you don't want people to be caught off guard either with the things that you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So any final comments, Tonya, or parting remarks for folks who are thinking about entrepreneurship and also engaged in academic work?
So I think this year, more than ever, we have an opportunity in the midst of utter chaos. This is a year of transformation. This is a year for reflection. This is a year of reimagining and really challenging the assumptions of these traditional structures and what we really want out of life, how we want to add value, not just as an intrapreneur, but an entrepreneur. So I want everybody to really be encouraged, and I hope this conversation just leads, if nothing else, for you to think about what else is possible and where do you want to be a year from now. And once you have an idea of that, then other things will start to, more practical things will come into view. But I want you to really catch a vision for what it might look like outside these traditional confines, because 2020 flipped everything upside down.
Oh, that is such great advice. And if you don't know where to get started, because creating a vision is hard, I mean, I think everybody needs to do it. I know that's hard. If you're still feeling your way around a bit, the other thing I would suggest is following some academics who are doing this, who have public
Mm,
platforms. So, like Tonya on Twitter is at IP Prof Evans, IPPROFEVANS. I'm Shontavia JESQ. Follow people who are already moving in these spaces, whether it's on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, wherever, and just see what they're doing, right? Like some days I look at Tanya's Twitter feed and I see, oh, wow, she's speaking at blah, blah, blah today, or she's giving a virtual keynote, or she's going live with Shontavia Johnson, or she's doing whatever she's doing. And you can start to get ideas there too, because those things aren't happening in a vacuum, right? Like there's a method to the madness for folks if they're writing for the New York Times or the Atlantic or whatever. But you can learn so much just by watching the moves of others. They can be your friends in your head. You may not actually know them in real life, but that's okay. But following folks who are doing this work and seeing what they're selling, what they're promoting, who they're collaborating with. If nothing else, you can see other people who are doing it successfully.
that's great.
All right, awesome. This has been an amazing conversation. Tonya, thank you so much again. Will you let folks know how to find you really quick?
Absolutely. AdvantageEvans.com is the one-stop shop, but also ProfTonyaEvans.com. So the academic and also the entrepreneurial, AdvantageEvans.com, ProfTonyaEvans.com.
Awesome. So if you like this conversation, if you like this video, I'd love for you to click the little thumbs up button below. I'd love for you also to subscribe to the channel. I'll be doing more conversations like this about people who make a difference every day in their lives, people who are doing really interesting creative things as it relates to entrepreneurship and as it relates to the future of entrepreneurship and the future of working professionals. Thank you so much for joining me, and visit me at shontavia.com for more. Thanks, everybody.